Thank you so much for joining us for CBN NewsWatch. I'm Ephraim Graham. Ahead today, inflation rising even higher. Now the Federal Reserve has to try to slow it down. And those rising prices are leading to falling poll numbers for President Joe Biden. New evidence shows the Omicron variant is not as deadly as the Delta variant, and a new report suggests a government agency is building a database containing the names of Americans who claim a religious objection to taking the COVID-19 vaccine. Plus,
we're calling upon President Biden to issue an executive order declaring a climate emergency. He's already said it's a code red emergency.
See what some activists are suggesting the U.S. do to fight this emergency. And National Religious Freedom Day is around the corner. So how committed is the United States to exposing violations of their basic God-given right to that freedom? We'll explore. All these stories and more are coming up next.
This is CBN NewsWatch.
And we begin this half hour with the latest inflation report showing the consumer price index at nearly a 40-year high, with supply chain crises still ongoing along the heavy government spending. The Federal Reserve is working to try to bring those rising prices down. It has to walk a tightrope by raising rates to rein in inflation without sending the economy into a recession. Caitlin Burke is on the story.
We know that high inflation exacts a toll, particularly for those less able to meet the higher costs of essentials like food, housing, and transportation.
Some of the biggest increases over the last year include gasoline up nearly 60%, followed by used vehicles and foods like meats, fish, and eggs.
When I went into the store yesterday, normally like a pound of ground chicken is usually about $3.99. Yesterday, it was $7.99.
Jerome Powell, seeking a second term as Federal Reserve Chairman, says the Fed is committed to a strong labor market, which can't happen without price stability.
In a way, high inflation is a severe threat to the achievement of maximum employment and to achieving a long expansion that can give us that.
Powell announced the Fed intends to raise interest rates during 2022 in an effort to control inflation. Economist Joel Griffith says while this is a necessary step, there are other factors that need to be addressed.
We've had over this past year and a half, governments suppressing supply. Think about all the COVID restrictions. And at the same time, you've had the Federal Reserve printing a lot of money. You've had the federal government spending a lot of those resources, and that's driven up demand. And that is the perfect recipe for rising prices.
While Griffith expects supply chain issues to resolve themselves, he adds if the government can't get its spending under control, things may get better, but inflation will remain elevated long into the future. Caitlin Burke, CBN News.
Caitlin, thank you. Inflation is a major reason for President Biden's poor numbers in the polls, and a new survey shows him at his lowest level yet. He has a 33% approval rating in the new Quinnipiac survey, compared to a 53% disapproval rating. 34% disapprove of his handling of the economy, with 57% disapproving. And on COVID, 39% approve of his response to COVID, while 55% do not. The president has also lost support among independents and Democrats as well. And those poor numbers have many Democrats talking about a challenger to President Joe Biden in 2024. One name being floated, Hillary Clinton. Two prominent Democrats writing in a Wall Street Journal piece Tuesday that she may be their best option for winning the next election, but not everyone is likely to agree. Meanwhile, the president is expected to send 1,000 military medical teams to 6 states to help hospitals overwhelmed by COVID. As global infections from Omicron continue to set new records, there's some encouraging news showing that the variant is not as deadly as the Delta strain. George Thomas has the details.
In a study of some 70,000 people in California, researchers found that 91% of patients with Omicron were less likely to die and were half as likely to be hospitalized than those who had the Delta strain.
Given the sheer number of cases, we may see deaths from Omicron, but I suspect the deaths that we're seeing now are still from Delta.
It's the first major study of its kind, and it also shows that those infected with Omicron spent less time in the hospital, and not even one in the study needed a ventilator. But a word of caution.
The problem is that for unvaccinated people or people who are not gotten boosted who are high risk, yes, and they may not end up on a ventilator, they're still getting quite sick from this. But it does show that Omicron seems to have less of an effect on lung disease, and that's hopeful.
Still, the virus continues to rage around the world and at a fast pace.
This huge spike in infections is being driven by the Omicron variant, which is rapidly replacing Delta in almost all countries.
The World Health Organization warning Wednesday that a record 15 million new COVID-19 infections were reported across the globe in a single week.
Our healthcare systems around the world are significantly overburdened.
The U.S. alone saw a record 73% increase in cases last week compared to the prior week. Some 750,000 people are getting infected each day, Omicron making up 98% of the new infections. The CDC releasing this stunning map showing almost every county in the country reporting COVID cases since December.
Virtually everybody is going to wind up getting exposed and likely get infected. But if you're vaccinated and if you're boosted, the chances of you getting sick are very, very low.
Meanwhile, federal health officials are urging Americans to replace those cloth masks with KN95 or N95 masks if possible for better protection. The good news is that in places like New York and Boston, where the virus first surged, COVID trends show a slowing of the virus for the first time, a 20% drop in New York alone since January 1st. Some health experts now openly saying that the world could enter a post-pandemic phase this year.
This virus is on its way to becoming endemic. There's no question about that. But we are very much right now in the middle of this pandemic.
George Thomas, CBN News.
A small, obscure federal agency issued a public notice Tuesday about a new policy that could mean the U.S. government is preparing to assemble a database containing the names of Americans who claim a religious objection to taking the COVID-19 vaccine. The Daily Signal, a news publication of the Heritage Foundation, reports the notice came from the Pretrial Service Agency for the District of Columbia. The agency announced the creation of a new record system that will store the names and personal religious information of all employees who make religious accommodation requests for religious exemption from the federally mandated vaccination requirement. And the Washington Times reports other federal departments may appear to be prepping for a similar list of religious objectors. You can get more on this story at cbnnews.com, including the details of the agency's announcement. President Biden is planning to head to the Capitol today to try to get Democratic support for the party's election reform bill. Biden has called for changing the Senate rules, including the filibuster, to pass the Democratic bill. And he gave a fiery speech in Atlanta Tuesday supporting the measure. Republicans call it a Democratic power grab, taking election authority away from the states. The normally low-key Senate Republican leader Mitch McConnell took to the Senate floor Wednesday to blast the president for his language in his speech. McConnell said he's known and respected Joe Biden for many years, but didn't recognize the man who spoke Tuesday.
He compared, listen to this, a bipartisan majority of senators to literal traitors. How profoundly unprecedented. A president shouting that 52 senators and millions of Americans are racist unless he gets whatever he wants is proving exactly why the framers built the Senate, to check his power.
The measure is unlikely to pass because some Democrats do not support changing Senate rules. Coming up, why some environmental activists are saying we're in a climate emergency. See what radical steps they suggest we need to take and how they could affect you. We're going to bring you the story when we come back. Climate lockdowns, what was once dismissed as a conspiracy theory, is now moving closer to reality. Environmental activists are claiming we're facing a climate emergency and lockdowns are necessary to save the planet. Dale Hurd is following the story.
In early December, the Washington Post reported that because of climate change, snow in the Mountain West may vanish for years at a time. The headline did not age well. Only days later in the West, it started to snow. And snow. And snow. This incredible photo was taken at Donner Summit in California around Christmas. Lake Tahoe got 16 feet of snow in December, breaking a 50-year record. In early January, some Virginia motorists were stuck on I-95 for more than 24 hours after snow and ice made the road impassable. Add this headline to a long string of failed climate change predictions. This headline from the London Independent predicting no more snowfalls is more than 20 years old. Climate experts now seem to have hedged their bets, saying global warming will both increase and decrease snowfall. Weather Bell meteorologist Joe Bastardi says more snow or less snow, it's called a normal winter.
The weather is always going back and forth. This is way, way within the realm of what you can expect in the kind of winter we have here.
But climate activists continue to insist that we face a worldwide climate emergency. And there's been more talk of the need for what are called climate lockdowns. Over the holidays, environmentalists staged what they called Occupy Biden, an 8-day protest outside Joe Biden's Delaware home demanding that he take action on the climate.
We're calling upon President Biden to issue an executive order declaring a climate emergency. He's already said it's a code red emergency.
Dozens of nations have already declared a climate emergency, including the entire European Union. And now, after accusing climate skeptics of inventing a conspiracy theory about climate lockdowns, there has been increasing talk of instituting climate lockdowns, modeled after COVID lockdowns and under a system called environmental authoritarianism, in which your right to drive a car or fly in a plane or own a big house could be suspended by the government in order to fight climate change.
Americans have to do with less. We're going to drive less, fly less, eat less meat. They're already talking about sustainable housing, shutting down the suburbs. This is the progressive vision of how you make people do with less in a climate emergency.
A recent article in the influential magazine Foreign Policy suggested democracy may not be compatible with reaching climate goals. This, even though actual weather statistics do not show there is a serious problem with the climate. Theoretical physicist Dr. Steve Koonin, former Undersecretary of Energy during the Obama administration, says the weather record shows there is no climate emergency.
Heat waves in the U.S. are now no more common than they were in 1900. No global trends in drought or in floods. Greenland's ice sheet isn't melting any more rapidly now than it was 80 years ago. That there's no long-term trend in hurricanes over the last 100 years.
But climate activists are advancing their agenda anyway, and new government regulations continue to punish and defund more reliable and less expensive fossil fuel sources in favor of less reliable and more expensive renewable energy.
President Biden, he should have the federal agencies oppose any new fossil fuel infrastructure.
So basically, this political movement has declared war on fossil fuels, and a lot of people have concluded in the industry, and also people who just are investors, that this sector has no future.
Rising energy prices this winter could be only the beginning. A recent study in the journal Nature found that meeting reduced carbon emission targets will cost more than $2 trillion annually. That's more than $5,000 per American per year, with cost by the end of this century totaling $1 quadrillion. Dale Hurd, CBN News.
Still ahead, National Religious Freedom Day is Sunday, so how committed is America under the Biden administration to exposing violations of religious freedom? We'll hear what one expert has to say right after this. This Sunday, January 16th, is National Religious Freedom Day. So how committed is the United States to exposing violations of the basic God-given rights and then responding? Appearing on this week's Global Lane, former Muslim Hadiya Miramati insists the Biden administration is hindering, not helping persecuted Christians and religious freedom around the world.
What do you see as being the biggest obstacle to religious freedom from this administration?
First of all, thank you for having me, and thank you. It's an honor to be here. International religious freedom has taken prominence in our country and in our foreign policy since we established the Office of International Religious Freedom back in 1998. So it's enjoyed bipartisan support, but has basically come to prominence more or less so in certain administrations. So it is the signaling to the rest of the world that we place a very high significance on religious freedom and religious liberty, not only of Christians, but also of other faith groups. And most importantly, under the previous administration, our greatest proponent of religious freedom was Secretary Pompeo, who put forth his Christian identity front and center and gained international notoriety and attention and respect from world leaders for letting the world know that United States would stand up for persecuted Christians and people that were being persecuted based on their faith, wherever in the world they existed, whatever faith they practiced. Unfortunately, in this administration, and the office head of religious freedom has signaled that this administration was going to balance foreign policy interests and balance human rights with religious freedom. So it wasn't going to take the prominence that it did under the previous administration. And as a consequence, Christians and other people persecuted for their faith are going to suffer.
Well, and we know about that in Nigeria and Afghanistan. Yes. In Afghanistan, we know a lot of secret Christians there left when the Taliban took over, but some remain behind. And knowing what you know about radical Islam, what are they facing? What can you tell us about those who are still there?
I mean, it's horrific. The main problem in Islamic countries, like, for example, myself, I can't travel to probably about 32 countries because I first entered those countries as a Muslim, is to leave Islam makes you a murtad, makes you an apostate, which is subject to death by most penal codes in Muslim countries, and especially Afghanistan. So it's not just wanting to be Christians, which is different than Islam, but it's leaving Islam to become a Christian. And so they're marked by death wherever they go. It's really a tragedy that we would leave not only Americans behind, but Afghan Christians behind without alternatives. And as Glenn Beck reported, that they are purposely hindering the evacuation of Christians to other countries that are willing to take them, and that are neighboring countries that are willing to take these refugees and other displaced Afghan Christians, but the State Department is basically preventing that evacuation or making it diplomatically more difficult.
In places like neighboring Pakistan. I know Christian Zafar Bhatti is now Pakistan's longest-serving blasphemy convict. Earlier this month, a judge sentenced him to death, and he's accused of sending blasphemous text messages about Muhammad's mother, yet his defenders say the messages were discovered on a phone that wasn't even his. Bhatti is illiterate. So why do cases like this keep happening? What can be done about this draconian blasphemy law in Pakistan and other Muslim countries like, say, Egypt?
See, here's the problem. Without the United States as a major superpower, and I actually wrote about this in the terms of the withdrawal from Afghanistan, without the United States as an active superpower promoting democratic values, first and foremost, religious freedom and the protection of religious liberty, then all the other countries around us, and especially those that are more aggressive, end up taking up policies without fear of reprisal from the United States. So in that article that I wrote, I also pointed out the problem with Azerbaijan and Turkey being aggressors against Armenia. In the 100-year anniversary of the genocide, even though the Biden administration acknowledges the genocide, we give $100 million in new aid to Azerbaijan without requiring them not to invade Armenia. So whether it's the Egyptian laws or it's what's happening in Afghanistan or other Muslim countries, Pakistan, as you mentioned, without the United States forcefully and very clearly articulating that it is at the forefront of our policy, these aggressive Islamic nations will continue to persecute Christians, whether they've converted or they're indigenous Christians, if we don't stand up for those rights.
Okay, I'm sorry we're out of time. Hedja Miramati, Thank you for sharing your time and insights with us. We appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me.
And you can learn more about stories like this and trends in the world by watching The Global Lane. You can find it on the CBN News Channel this evening at 8:30 Eastern Standard Time. You can also find it on demand or on the CBN News app. Coming up, it's a children's book that helps dads have deeper bonds with their children. Find out more about the new book and its author when we come back. Stay with us. Harold Kronk, the award-winning director of the franchise series God's Not Dead, has penned his first children's book, The Beard Ballad. The book shares a positive message to help fathers have a deeper connection with their children. The story is about a father and a son who grow their bond as their beards grow long together. Phil Robertson of the hit show Duck Dynasty did the foreword for the book and even shared the story with some children.
It was a blurry-eyed, blustery, frigid fall day. I could not have imagined what was headed in my way. My dad, in his tie, all ready for work, had entered the kitchen with a bit of a smirk. It was then that I noticed his jaw and his chin were covered in stubble, which he rubbed with a grin.
And you can get a copy of The Beard Ballad wherever books are sold. Time now for your Thursday Thankful, and today I hope you'll join me in this prayer of gratitude. Father, thank you for the miracle of simply breathing. It is one of many miracles you allow me to experience each day that you open my eyes. And in the words of one of my favorite songs, I've got miracles on miracles, a million little miracles. 1, 2, 3, I can't even count them all. That's going to do it for this edition of CBN NewsWatch. You can always find more of our programs on the CBN News Channel. You can find them there at any time, as well as online at cbnnews.com. We'd love to know what you think about the stories you've seen here today. You can email us. The address is right there on your screen. It's newswatch@cbn.com. And of course, you can always reach out and touch us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. We would love to hear from you. Thank you so much for watching. I encourage you to make today a thankful Thursday and join us again right back here, same time tomorrow. Goodbye. Thank you so much for watching. God bless. We'll see you next time.